In these times of uncertainty, it's all the more important that we keep collaborating, informing, and inspiring each other, so that we can be smarter and better tomorrow. Welcome to the Pakhuis de Zwijger livecast.
Welcome to Irregular Migration in Europe, a livecast brought to you by Pakhuis de Zwijger in collaborations with the United Nations Development Programme Africa, the UNDP. Welcome to all our viewers through Facebook Live, through Zoom, and through the live stream. My name is Hasna El Maroudi, and today I will be your host. We're going to be talking about irregular migration in Europe, but also in the Netherlands. In 2019, the UNDP published a report called Scaling Fences, Voices of Irregular African Migrants to Europe. For this research, almost 2,000 migrants in 13 different European countries were interviewed, also migrants here in the Netherlands. Migration is an important issue in Europe, but also particularly in the upcoming elections here in the Netherlands. And in the next hour, we would like to focus on the results of the report. We're going to be talking about the current framing of irregular migration and try to place it in a broader context. What does the current approach bring, and what are possible future perspectives? First up will be Jide Okeke. He's the regional coordinator for the UNDP in Africa, and he will share with us his insights also on the report. After that, Professor of Global Labour and Migration History, Leo Lucassen, will kick off with a short keynote presentation on the Dutch situation, after which the two will go into a conversation. Subsequently, we'll have a panel discussion to talk about the ways to improve the situation of irregular migrants here in the Netherlands and specifically in Amsterdam. This will be with Mustafa, Anne van Schijk, Don Seder, and Eliane Schultz, whom of course I will later introduce. Throughout the program, but specifically during the panel, we welcome all the questions from the audience, so please do so. You can do this if you're watching through Zoom or on the Pakhuis de Zwijger program page or by watching the Facebook live stream. Let's start. Welcome, Jide. You're joining us through Zoom today. How are you?
Thank you so much for having me. I'm doing really well. I am currently in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I was wondering where you are, because we keep saying the UNDP Africa, but Africa is the second largest continent in the world. So, but before we dive into the report Scaling Fences, you're the regional coordinator. Could you tell me a little bit more what that entails? So what is your job? What do you do?
Okay, thank you for having me. I am actually the coordinator of the regional program for Africa. And the regional program for Africa is a flagship of UNDP on the continent. We invest across a number of thematic priorities across the continent, which we think have the ability to scale. So over the last couple of years, we have invested in the area of peace and security around stabilization, preventing violent extremism. We've also done the same on migration, as you can tell from the Scaling Fences report. And all of these are towards achieving the Sustainable Development Goals, which is, of course, in line with the African Union Agenda 2063 for the continent.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And what is that agenda?
The Agenda 2063 is an aspirational document of the Africa that the African peoples are expected to desire and want. It is to create a secure, peaceful, and prosperous continent by 2023. It's quite ambitious, but we are supporting the African Union towards this aspiration.
Yeah, sounds good. It's also, I think, one of the goals so that migrants might not want to leave and come to Europe. What are the reasons for coming to Europe for migrants, and who are the people that are coming here?
Thank you. Very important question, and that is at the heart of the question that we sought to answer in our report, Scaling Fences. And as you mentioned in your introductory remark, we interviewed over 3,000 respondents, out of which over 2,000, almost 2,000 were seen as eligible in our sample size. And we sought to do two things. First, we wanted to know the relationship between irregular migration and development. And also we wanted to determine what are the drivers of irregular migration beyond the traditional school of thought, which presupposes that irregular migrants are generally very poor, do not have opportunities back home, and are usually coming from crisis or conflict situation. And our findings were quite revealing. And I would just mention two to answer your question. The first finding that we certainly highlighted in our report is that 85% of those that we interviewed were from urban cities. So they were not from rural communities, they were not from communities that were experiencing violent conflict, but generally they were from urban centers that had seen some level of development. The second point, which we found very striking in our report, is that 57% of those that we interviewed had at least a secondary school education before they left Africa. And so this is an interesting emphasis on or departure from the traditional notions that some of these irregular migrants they do not have opportunities back home. But what is very compelling in terms of the research is the fact that the ambition of these irregular migrants could not be fulfilled back home. They could not be fulfilled in Africa. And that is why they sought to find opportunities, sometimes having to take very risky paths to realize their ambition in Europe. But I'll stop there just in case you would like to ask some follow-up questions.
Yeah, you also named development quite shortly. And what is the role of development? Because I can also think that if the situation develops further and they can find the opportunities that they seek, they can stay there. What is the role of development?
So, what we were looking at in terms of development here is that if you look at some of the cities where these irregular migrants came from, Lagos, Addis Ababa, to some extent, even Nairobi. These are cities that have seen over the years some appreciation in development. And these are places where people have jobs. So when we talk about development, we are not just talking about job creation for young people, but rather what is important here is the quality of jobs that are being created for these people that would serve as an incentive for them to stay within the continent. And I think this is one aspect that as development practitioners, as policymakers, we really need to elevate as part of our discussions, because if you are able to create the right quality of jobs at the right scale, you most likely will reduce the tendency of some of these irregular migrants to travel to Europe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. In the pictures that are shown behind me, you can see several stories. I already saw two men. And when we talk about irregular migrants here in the Netherlands, people often point to men, and they, as if only men come to Europe. But there are also a lot of women that are coming here. What are the differences that they have, their experiences, but also their reasons to leave Africa?
Thank you so much. In our research, we found that there were commonalities between men and women as in terms of the reasons why they left Africa. However, in our sample size, we were able to interview only 23% of women out of the entire sample size that we had pulled together, almost 2,000. And we realized that there were differences in the experiences of men and women in Europe. And at the heart of this difference was that most women tend to settle faster and build resilience quicker than men. We did not go into the reasons why that was the case, but it was it was revealed through our research that men were generally facing more challenges than their women counterparts. And in fact, the women were able to migrate from being irregular migrants to being residents or legal residents in most European societies. But of course, this is based on the small sample size that we had collected. But it is certainly one that should be highlighted. Over.
Yeah. And how? Yeah. What should the next steps be? Like, how can we move forward from here? From the report has been done, the research has been done. We know now who these people are, and so what are the next steps?
So, in terms of the next steps, here I would like to submit 3 recommendations, if you allow me. From our research, it is very clear that Africa needs transformative development. We need to expand opportunities and choices within Africa. I think this is certainly at the heart of our research. So as we think about how European policymakers engage with African stakeholders and how African stakeholders themselves engage with each other, if we are serious about making changes to the current pattern of irregular migration from Africa to Europe, we need to invest in creating better opportunities and choices for African people within the continent. I think the second aspect, which is quite sensitive to talk about, but our report highlighted, is that we are also there is a need for a careful introspection around how we begin to move from ungoverned to governed migration. We are seeing that majority of the policies that are being created are quite securitized. And there must be ways in which the EU and African stakeholders can reach a political consensus around this transition from ungoverned and governed migration. The last point, which I think is important, is that we really need to rethink how we discuss migration. For far too long, we have been discussing migration as in securitized terms. I think, and some of the traditional impressions or schools of thought around why people migrate is really not valid today. I think we really need to have a new conversation around that. So those are the 3 recommendations that we have.
Yeah, I found it very striking also in the report that it said that almost half of irregular migrants actually had a job back home. So I think that's one of the biggest ideas that need to be shown, that that they're not all unemployed. Thank you, Jide, for your great insights also into the report, Scaling Fences. You will be right back with us, but before you join me in the conversation with Leo, we're going to listen to Leo Lucas first. He has prepared a keynote presentation on irregular migration here in the Netherlands. Just a quick intro into who Leo Lucas is. He is a professor of global labor and migration history and director of the International Institute of Social History. Leo wants to stimulate interdisciplinary research on migration history, and he regularly contributes to the public debate on immigration here in the Netherlands. Take it away, Leo.
Yeah, thank you very much. So let's see whether this works. Yeah, thank you. Okay, well, already a lot has been said, and I very much agree with what has been said so far. If you look at the Netherlands, when it comes to discussing migration in general and irregular migration more in particular, it is striking how large Africa looms over this discussion. So there's this very dominant image of migration, that if we don't stop people, especially in the Mediterranean, then they will flood Europe by the millions. This is a very strong image, not only, let's say, by people who are racist or whatever, but there's a very strong idea that if we don't do anything, if we don't build fences and make the European Union into a fortress, then we will be flooded by poor people from Africa. And these kind of images, which, let's say, may seem a little bit innocent because you could say that this is a nice infographic. It shows where this is about asylum seekers, where people come from. So it's nice to summarize it in one picture. But if you look at this picture again, then you see that it also entails a lot of threat. Because if you just push these arrows more in the direction of Europe, there's no Europe left. So there's only arrows filled with people from other continents, especially from Africa, that will take over Europe. So either people see this as a disaster, the extreme right or the radical right would then more prefer, let's say, not only as a disaster, but also as a imminent and existential threat to Europeans and to European culture and European values. All these assumptions have become very widely spread, especially in the last 5 to 6 years, starting with what has been called the Refugee Crisis in 2015. And then you also get this image of if you don't stop these people, then you will have a mass exodus from Africa. So Africa will empty out, and also other parts of the world, like the Middle East, but especially Africa seems to have a very special place in these kind of arguments. The idea is that it is unprecedented. But if you then look, for example, at the share of people from Africa in the Dutch population, it's very small. Especially if you deduct people from Morocco who came for very different reasons in the 1960s and 70s as labor migrants. But if you focus on people coming from sub-Saharan Africa, from the Horn of Africa, we're talking about very, very, very low numbers. And secondly, there's also this idea that what happened in the last 5 to 6 years is unprecedented, that Europe never was confronted with so many people coming from to seek asylum and refuge. Well, for the Netherlands, this is not true. As you can see here, the 1990s, many more people came to the Netherlands as asylum seekers. And secondly, it's also clear that, let's say, the regions where people came from are also roughly the same, especially the Middle East and the Horn of Africa, which were then well-known areas of war and conflict. Sorry, now I lost my PowerPoint. Well, it doesn't matter because I don't need these pictures. So what these pictures especially tell, I'll try it again. Yeah. Also, I'll skip this one. If you look at asylum applications from Africans in the European Union, this also contradicts this idea of that, let's say, more and more Africans will try to reach the shores of Europe. Well, most of the people from Africa who come to Europe, by the way, do this in a regular way. They have a visa in their passport, etc., and they join existing communities, especially in countries like France and Great Britain, because of the imperial and colonial legacies. But if you look at those who don't get the visa, and they can only come to Europe in an irregular way and often use the asylum channel to reach Europe. Here you see in this graph, which starts in 1990, this shows you the last 30 years. Yeah, there's some up and down, but basically the image is not that different. And you have to realize that in this period, the population of Africa has increased greatly. So what you see here is that per year, between 150, 160, 170,000 people from Africa try to use the asylum channel to come to Europe. This is 0.02% of the population of sub-Saharan Africa. So we're talking about very, very small numbers. But the idea is exactly the opposite. The idea that if we don't do anything, then we will be flooded. Well, there is no flood to speak of in these kind of statistics. Moreover, more qualitative research like this from Klingendahl from a couple of years ago showing that by far most migration is within Africa, within nation states in Africa, and as far as it is over longer distances, people, and also those who cross the Sahara to go to North Africa, most of them don't have the intention to go to Europe because they're looking for jobs in Northern Africa. So let's say the facts are very different from what people assume. And what makes this discussion extra difficult is that not only is there racism and do extreme right parties have all kind of apocalyptical visions of what these migrants might constitute, or what they might do and what the consequences might be for Europe and Europeans, but there's also a much widely shared idea that we have to do something about the root causes of migration, that Africans in a way are very different people than Europeans or other people on the globe, because if you don't stop them, they will come. They will not think, they will just use the opportunity. Well, that is not true at all. If you look and also at the research that has been mentioned so far, and if you look at the research that we know, people are very selective. People do think about whether to migrate and what kind of risks they want to take. And this is not very different from what Europeans did, let's say, 100 years ago. Also, Europeans used to go to look for work within Europe. And they're still doing this, but they did it in very similar ways as Africans make decisions nowadays, either to migrate or within Africa or to Europe. So in this sense, there is nothing new under the sun. And I think we have to realize that migration is not a disease. It's not something that we should stop. No, migration is something that is a normal feature of human societies. So what are the implications then for irregular migrants now and for future policies? I would say that instead of making the fences higher and higher and creating this fortress of Europe and also externalizing the borders deep into Africa, south of the Sahara, we should more think about breathing borders and also allowing all kinds of, let's say, people from Africa who want to go to Europe to work here and have opportunities, to facilitate that in some way and to facilitate both circular migration, but also for those who come from Africa to Europe and do, let's say, find a good place and a good opportunity, a good job, to also offer them path of integration, not only circular, but also path of integration. Only then I think we can really start to solve this problem of what now is known as irregular migration. And I think this is what the facts show, and this is also very important for policymakers to really change gears and think and start thinking in a different way about migration, especially from Africa, than they have done so far. I will leave it at that. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Leo. Gita, before I ask you for a first reaction, I would like to remind the audience that you can ask questions. You can do this if you're watching through Zoom on the Pakhuis de Zwijger program page or by watching Facebook, the live stream. Gita, as you've listened to Leo right now, maybe you can give us a first reaction to what you've just heard. Is it something that sounds familiar to you, or have you learned something new?
Thank you, Leo. It's very compelling. I think it reinforces the Scaling Fences report in many ways. And just to highlight a couple of points, that migration is as old as mankind. I think this is something that we should constantly always reiterate. And migration could also be a mutually reinforcing enabler on both sides. As Leo mentioned, it could contribute to economic performance in Europe, but you can also look at the figures around remittances to Africa. I mean, that is also quite significant amongst the diaspora community. And I think the last point, which I take from that presentation, is that we need a new conversation on migration. The migration, the type of conversation we've been having over the last decade or so has not necessarily worked for enhancing the benefits of migration. And I think this is the point that Leo made, which I found really, really striking. But in many ways, there are a lot of consistencies, and thank you so much for that.
Mm-hmm. And Leo, where does this idea, because while you were talking, I was thinking about the floods that have been mentioned, like as if the people are actually flooding Europe. Mm-hmm. Where does this idea come from? If when you look at the numbers, first of all, it's not true, but also making them this natural disaster, because that's basically what they're called.
Yeah, where does it come from? Well, I think these are all quite old ideas. Also, in the 19th century in Europe, there was very similar, let's say, fears of people coming from the countryside to cities, for example. So in that sense, this has quite a history. But I think what has triggered it very much into the public and into the political domain is especially what is then called as the refugee crisis of 2015. This was really a point, if you look at the political discussions in Europe, that politicians had these apocalyptical visions of what would happen, and also this idea that this had never happened before, which is not true, but this apocalyptical idea that we have to stop them and otherwise they will keep coming, and as if these are not people who make rational choices, who think about, let's say, yes, I can go to Europe, but do I have a place to stay? Can I get a job? I mean, these are all, let's say, all kind of things that every migrant thinks about, because migration is costly, both in money terms, but also emotionally. I mean, you have to give up your friends, your networks. It takes a lot of risks, so people don't just migrate. So it's a very selective process, and so those of the people who do choose to go to Europe, which again, this is a very small number if you look at the total population of Africa, and the fact is that we don't give them the opportunity to really show their talents as well, because the research shows these are not, let's say, the poorest of Africa who are coming.
And you've both touched on Europe and Africa working together to make migration possible in a regular way. Gide, what can the UNDP do in that matter?
So thank you. So we are not a migration agency, but we of course have we work closely with IOM and other organizations that have far better technical capabilities in this regard. But what we thought we could do is to constantly provide the facts from a development lens, and we think this contributes quite significantly to policy debates. So through Scaling Fences, we felt that by providing such a data-driven analysis around migration and demonstrating through the empirical data that we're able to gather the dynamics around irregular migration, this could provide a basis for a new type of conversation between policymakers on both sides, in ways that would contribute, hopefully, to a much more responsible pathway for migration governance, on both within Africa, but also in Europe.
Yeah. And Leo, the elections here in the Netherlands are upcoming. What should the political parties be thinking about when it comes to irregular migration and changing that and maybe making it possible? In what ways?
Yeah. Well, I think that political parties should have a long-term vision when it comes to the demography of Europe, but also to the labor market of Europe. You already see now that in a number of sectors, it's already difficult to get enough labor, and not only low-skilled, also high-skilled labor. You also already see now initiatives to enable people from outside of the EU, especially from Southeast Asia. We're talking about Nepal, we're talking about Vietnam, about Thailand, to allow people under certain conditions to come to Europe. Mm-hmm. And people are already coming through these venues, through Poland and the Ukraine, legally. Africa, for some reason, is totally left out of this picture. Although the historical ties to a lot of African countries are much stronger, although Africa is much nearer than Southeast Asia is, and I think this. So we should look at this whole issue of irregular migration in this more larger demographic and socioeconomic picture, and then allowing much more, let's say, many more of these legal pathways for people to come to Europe. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I mean, it's also in our own interest. Even if you don't like these people, it's in your interest.
Yeah. Well, that's a very clear vision. Gita, can I thank you so much for joining us today via Zoom? And Leo Lucas, thank you so much for being here today with
You're
us.
Welcome.
Next up is our panel talk. Again, I would like to remind all the viewers that you can ask questions. You can do that if you're watching through Zoom on the Pakhuis de Zwijger program page or by watching the Facebook live stream. Please do so. With me here today are Anne van Schijk. Anne is General Coordinator at ASKV Refugee Support, and in the past she has worked for various environmental and human rights organizations such as Environmental Defense, Friends of the Earth, Oxfam Novib and Clean Clothes Campaign. Also here is Eliane Schultz. She is a diaconal worker at the Lutheran Church in Amsterdam Southeast. The church, the Nieuwe Stad, provides free meals to people in Amsterdam who need help, and thereby it became a meeting place for many different people needing an escape from loneliness for a while, including undocumented people. Also here with me today is Don Seder. He is a Dutch lawyer and politician. He is a member of the ChristenUnie, and in 2018 he became the first councillor for his party here in Amsterdam. From 2015 to 2018, he also was a duo committee member of the Provincial Council of North Holland for the ChristenUnie SGP fraction, and at the moment he is parliamentary candidate for the party. Don founded his own law firm in 2015. And last but definitely not least, with me here today is Mustafa. Mustafa came to Europe from Gambia and is therefore an expert by experience in the field of migration. He is also, very Dutch, a cheesemaker. Welcome to you all. So good to have you here with me. So first, we just heard Leo and Gita talk about research and the reports revolving around migration. And just a question a little bit for all of you is, how do you listen to what they both said, that the numbers differ so much from the image or maybe the framing? Let's start with you.
Oh, I think for us it's very recognizable that people are scared of the unknown, and people are scared of numbers, and people are scared of people that they think they might not relate to. We have started several shelters in Amsterdam, and I think this is something that will probably be recognizable for all of you, is that every time we start something new, we see that there is resistance from the neighborhood. And the last time we opened up a facility in the north of Amsterdam, and people actually started a petition against coming of undocumented refugees, because that is the people we work for. And now we're there, they're totally happy with the people who inhabit the center, and they actually volunteer, and there is a lot of exchange. So I think that one of the recommendations of the report is to make sure that there is more information about what is actually happening, what are the numbers and faces behind the developments that Leo also said. I think it's very important that we make sure that people understand who these people actually are and what the numbers actually are.
Yeah. And Mustafa, how did you listen to what was just told?
Yeah, I think it was pretty loud and clear, but I think the message has to be spread out You know, it has to be understood, I think, in a different ways anyway. Yeah, I think that's the because from my experience, I think now it is most people don't want to understand. They just want to hear, but they're not willing to understand.
And do you have any idea why they're not willing to understand?
Yeah, because they are pretty much scared, and it's good to be scared, but if you want to make if you want to solve it, you try to understand it first, I think.
Yeah. And what would you say? Don, let's go to you. What would be the main issue when it comes to irregular migration?
Well, I think that the main issue is that we talk about it as it is one group, as it is one group, but there are many different types of irregular migration, and that also leads to a political discourse where it's just one big framing. Well, when you look at it, you see stateless people, you see people that come from a place of war, you see that people that come here to find some economic benefits, and all these different sections, they have a different origin and also different solution. So I think that's the main problem, that politics hasn't found a way to really tackle the issue in broad, because I think we're talking about a certain frame, especially certain political parties, which does not do justice to the facts, and that there are a lot of different stories with a lot of context. And I think we need to look at that also from a legal perspective, that if we really want to change things, we really need to identify the specific migration areas and really tackle them. And I don't think that politics has been ready to really do that, because it needs nuance. And that's something that a lot of political parties are not ready to talk about, to talk about migration in a nuanced way.
Why not? I mean, we're talking about people here.
It doesn't come across if you talk about migration in a good way. I think a lot of people want to have quick solutions, especially for migration. So what you've seen the last couple of years in the country is that there's a right discourse. When you look at the majority in the parliament right now, the majority is a right-wing based. And it seems that it sells to give a quick solution and to provide and sell people a quick answer. But that's not the case. When you look at the migration rules and regulation, it's flawed in this country. We haven't succeeded in the last 20, 30 years to really come up with migration rules that actually work. So I think we also need to do some self-reflection as a government and admit that a lot of these things that are causing, which the politics is blaming, has to do with the government failing to create regulation in a certain way that it actually works.
Yeah, that's also a little bit what Gide and Leo also touched on. Also looking for ways in which you can regulate the migration and maybe make irregular migration just regular migration. I find it so difficult to say irregular migration because the framing is really, so intense that I tend to say illegal migration immediately. Yeah. That's how framing works. Eliana, where do you think the system is failing? Because I guess with your work and being connected so much, you can also see where there are holes in the system.
Yeah, like what you said just now, we have a project where we bring meals to people in Amsterdam Zuidoost who need it. And because of the corona crisis, there's a lot of people who really need food support. And my whole team basically is made up of irregular migrants. So my cooks and my delivery guys, they're all from this group. What I see is that they are hard workers, they're very motivated, they're very much engaged in what we do. And I also see that the possibilities they have for having a real job is very limited. Most of those people know that they are officially not supposed to be here, they're not supposed to work here. So if they do, and they are here, we all know that, then they try to do it in a bit of a hidden way. So you're renting or you're working somewhere and you try to make sure that nobody knows it. And then this makes it impossible for people working in informal organizations and government organizations to know exactly who's there and what's happening. So I think the policies we have now can never be right because you're trying to make a policy for a group of people that's trying to be invisible because they are not supposed to be here.
Yeah, but we're also trying to look for solutions today. So maybe you have some ideas on it. Like what would be, where do you see opportunities? I'm not going to make you say
what is the solution to
what's the
everything?
solution, but maybe some opportunities.
Yeah, I think many of the solutions have already been mentioned by Don and Eliana, and that is that the current government is failing us on a big scale. Everybody knows that the current policies are not working, that it's flawed, that it leaves people living in the margins, people are not allowed to work, people are not allowed to study, people are not allowed to develop their own lives, but they're here. And there is a duty of care. And for us, it's really difficult to understand why that doesn't take the upper hand. There is a duty of care for people who are in your country, on your ground, and you need to make sure that they have access to education, social health care, and also the right to develop themselves. It's a basic human right.
Yeah.
So I would start with that. We're very hopeful that Don will arrange that once he's chosen in Parliament. Very high hopes on you. But also on other, we need the shifting of the frame, first of all. And secondly, I think the City Council of Amsterdam is actually doing a great job at the moment by allowing people in specific shelters, by joining a pilot program, which is actually trying to improve the situation of
Which
undocumented.
pilot program is that? Is that the LVV?
It's the LVV. And the English name for it is the National Immigration Facilities. And it means that there's in 5 different cities in the Netherlands, there is now a pilot which allows local city governments, organizations like ours, but also the IND and DTNV and the immigration police to sit together and actually look at, well, what is the problem with some of the cases of people who have been here for sometimes decades, and is there a way that we can make sure that there is a solution out of their illegal situation?
Yeah.
So there is already different initiatives, but for the moment I don't think it's far-reaching enough.
Yeah. The LVV has been running, I think in May it will be about 2 years.
1 year.
1 year?
Yeah, 2 years. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry,
No.
2 years.
The COVID year is real. I know it feels not real, but it's real.
Yeah.
Can you already see if it's working?
Well, there are several things that are working really well, and that is, as I said, there is special shelter. There is more financial possibilities for people to actually have a look at their cases and see if there's any legal developments. But in terms of real solutions, I think that's not happening right now. And that is because we are placed in a situation where we have to find these solutions in the current frame of law. So the law itself is not changing.
Yeah.
And that is a possibility. So because you can look at cases again and again and again, but if it doesn't change, it's going to stay the same. And I want to state one case, for example, on statelessness people. You can be stateless, but that doesn't mean that you have a right to a permit. You can't go back, you can't go anywhere, nobody will accept you, and you're not allowed to stay here.
Yeah.
And so you can go to lawyers, you can discuss with policy officials, etc. But if the law doesn't change, you will still remain in that situation.
Yeah, it's an endless cycle. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And I find it really difficult to understand why we accept this. We are one of the richest countries in the world. There's not that many people left. We've just heard from Leo Lucassen. Why do we allow for these people to live in the margins of our society and make sure that they have a life of misery, basically, where we have the power to change this?
Yeah. So this is a very organizational and political change that could be made. In a bit, I'm going to talk to you about the personal, but first I'd like to know about the laws, because why can't these laws be changed? What kind of laws are these?
Well, you need a majority to change laws, so hopefully that will change during the next upcoming elections and the new parliament. But I think there are a lot of things to tackle, but when I look at what is the most urgent, I think about the children. You have a lot of undocumented children who, a lot of them are even born here. A lot of them came at a young age. They go to school here. They go to soccer together. They don't know any other place or even other language or country than the Netherlands. But when they turn 18, it's like they fall into a black hole when it comes to education, when it comes to work. That's my main concern. Also in Amsterdam, I created an initiative to really, from a local perspective, really help these kids when it comes to education, care, and some other things. But you need a national change, and that's something also that the Christian Union proposed. Actually, I brought that in, that we really need to look into that, because there's a lot of focus on asylum seekers, which is okay, but we have tens of thousands of children living in this country, and we have laws that are inadequate to come up with a solution. And that's mostly because nobody's talking about it in the parliament. Nobody knows about it. There's not a lot of information. Also because of what was said, is that a lot of people, there's certain benefits to be hidden. People don't want to be out in the open. So that's a group that's hard to be, that doesn't want to be found by politicians.
Would you think?
Well, if you're out in the open, a lot of people just want to work, want to have housing, and want to have a better future for their kids. So it's not about creating a political movement. It's not about. They just want to be. Yeah. So it's not in their benefit to go out and just organize themselves and really make a fuss about things. But during the COVID crisis, when all the irregular types of work came to an end, that's when you saw how big the problem is. And we have tens of thousands of these people. So first step is, when it comes to the kids, I'm really proposing that we create a law that these kids, as they are turning 18, they get a permit, and as they get the permit, after a couple of years, they can opt for nationality. We don't have that. Other countries have that. We don't have that, and I think that's unwise on many levels.
There's also one of the questions that came in through the Zoom from Aisha. She wants to know if there are any examples abroad of governments that are dealing really well with irregular migrants or migration.
Well, I always like to refer to Spain. It's not perfect, but at least there's an option, which the Dutch migration system does not have, that if you can show that you've worked, whether regulated or not, if you can show that that has happened, and if you meet some other criteria, then you can opt for having a staying permit, and after a couple of years, you can opt for nationality. So at least there is perspective. I'm not saying that's perfect, but there's something that we as a Dutch, our system does not allow. And I think that's causing a lot of problem. Also because we have educated people that speak the language, that live here, that know how the system works. And after 18 years old, we are telling them, well, you can't work here. That's, even if you have even if you're a right-wing party that's just thinking about the economy of the country, even that's an argument to create a way for these people to actually work and also contribute to society. So it's not just from a human rights perspective, which is very important. It's also from an economic perspective unwise to tell people that are born and raised here, that know how to operate in this country. After 18, you know what, but you can't work here.
Yeah, no, that's.
So we need to change. So we need to change that first and foremost, because nobody talks about it, and it's about tens of thousands of people. Yeah. And I live in Amsterdam Southeast. I grew up among these kids. We grew up together. And
you've seen it up close.
I've seen it up close, and it's a shame. It's really a shame for the government that we don't talk about this.
Yeah, I want to shift to this side of the table, because we've had a few points now that point towards change in a political kind of way, in an organizational kind of way. But I would also like to talk a little bit more about the framing and the way people look at irregular migrants. And a lot of negative framing exists around the people who don't have official documents to stay here. What would be the ways to change this? How would better legal pathways or positions may help this? Or maybe even through the work that people meet these irregular migrants? Do you have any ideas about that,
Yeah, I
Liana?
think that last thing is more what I would think. I think a lot of fear that people have is also because they don't know anybody that they have this fear of. So when you start knowing a person, I think you always find that that person is not as scary as what you thought. So when it comes to irregular migrants, I think it would definitely be good if we can have more opportunities to just meet each other and to find ways to open our society up to them in many different ways, so that there's just more communication and more contact. And I think that would be a way to lose that fear and to realize that there's not much to be afraid of. I think that would maybe have a bigger effect than the legal pathways.
Yeah, you're nodding. I haven't really asked you a lot about your personal life, where you're from, why you're here, and how you got here. Yeah. We do have some questions from the audience.
All right.
This one is, how did you end up becoming a cheesemaker?
Yeah, that's the whole sense of traveling, I guess. You get to travel around and you get to adopt some positive stuff which will benefit like myself. Mm-hmm. I think that's why I go for it. Yeah. Because I knew it's something positive.
Yeah. Yeah. That's nice. And what would you say you need from the government right now to improve your situation, or what did you need when you arrived here?
Well, first of all, I'm not really a cripple, neither a beggar. I knew like what it is. Mm-hmm. So I just feel like to express my feelings. That's it. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, and to contribute and to work and to,
you know. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. And what, Anna and Eliane, what do the both of you need to be able to do your work better, to improve your work, circumstances?
I'm still gonna come back to policy change. It's not because I do understand that we need to inform people of who the undocumented people really are, and I think that will make a shift in understanding why some people are here. But if you really want to give people a chance in life, you need to have better policies in place, and not just here in the Netherlands, but also in the whole of Europe, of course, because you see also there that the policies are very much towards restricting access to Europe, which I think is very flawed. You can't prevent people from coming. They will come anyway. And I think it's much better, as the report points out, and also Leo Lucas point out, accept this as a reality and change your policies in that regard. And so for us, for example, it's important that we have special measures at the government, which is, for example, the discretionary policy. This is a possibility for a minister to change the situation of one certain person, for example, to give this person a legal permit for residence. This has been taken away in 2019. And we see the results of that very often, because normally you would have this was something as a last resort that you could go to a minister and say, well, look, this person has been here for decades. There's no way this person
As we've
can
seen
return.
with a lot of children also, it happened.
Yeah. And so, and it is actually because when there was like a children's pardon in 2019, there was the exchange. And so we see that this is a very uncomfortable reality now for many people who are now stuck because this has been changed. So this is something that's very small, but we do think that when the upcoming elections are done and there is this negotiation phase, we do hope that political parties will make sure that the discretionary policy will return.
But there's also this thing of the national politics pointing towards Europe, local politics pointing towards the national politics. So, and I think there's also change, or it differs whether you're in Rotterdam, Amsterdam, Utrecht, Eindhoven, Groningen, or Almelo. You're nodding?
Yeah, I recognize that when you talk to like the local politicians in Amsterdam, they would say like, I can't because of the national laws, and the national ones would say like, I can't because of Europe.
And what are you asking when you talk to them?
Well, for instance, if you ask like for a work permit for a very specific person with very specific skills, and maybe the local person would say, yeah, this would be a good idea, but you can't because of rules that are made like at such a different level that you can't change it here. So I think what's also missing is a good communication between the different parts that are involved in the whole picture. And that's what I like about the UN research report, that it looks at the situations in Africa, but also the situation in Europe, because it's not two different things. It's connected, and I think what we do in Africa affects what happens here. But for now, you see like the people who are trying to change things here are not trying to change things in those African countries, and then there's some kind of miscommunication.
Yeah. This is also a question for Mustafa. It says, what is the dream of Mustafa? How is he thinking about his own country? I always then wonder, what is your own country? Is there a chance to learn here and to go back with good education? What is your future reference, your goal?
Yeah, I mean, I think sky is the limit, first of all. And no place like home. And
what is home to you?
Yeah, home is where you feel loved and being part of whatsoever we might call it. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you can just feel it like home.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's good. Mm. I'm gonna go back to politics again, but Don, sorry, you're not allowed to answer this question because I already know the answer.
No problem.
Samia wants to know what parties reflect the necessary values and present the best future perspectives for the coming election when it comes to irregular migration. So what are you guys voting?
Yeah, that is a secret. It is, we actually made an analysis together with other organizations in the Netherlands, an analysis of all of the plans of all political parties with regard to undocumented refugees. Mm-hmm. So I would say Don's party certainly ranks very high. Also Bijeen, GroenLinks, Green Left, the D66. I think those are the parties that are really getting it, understanding that something needs to change. And then there's also the Socialist Party, the Labour Party, whom we hope will also champion these people during the upcoming negotiations. And then the right-wing parties are, of course, a lost case. We're very worried that they will gain a majority again, because when we made the analysis of the party programs, we saw that there is a lot of new regulation might be coming up in making it actually strafbaar, illegal to be illegal.
Punishable.
I'm not very sure. So make it against the law. Or if you don't want to collaborate on returning to your country of origin, that would also be made illegal, and therefore people can be placed in a detention, and that is a horrible place to be, because people can be stuck there for weeks or sometimes months without having any opportunity. They can't be deported because their country won't take them back. They're not allowed to go back to Dutch society. So people are detained only for being here without papers. That's also something that is sometimes very hard for us to understand. So on the whole, I think we have reasons to be concerned, but we've also reasons to be optimistic, depending on the outcome of the elections.
Yeah. You're nodding.
Yeah, well, we hope, like I said, on a political and a legal perspective, I really hope that the next couple of years we change the narrative in the parliament, but we also gain much more knowledge on the legal ways, because we can philosophize about migration, but there's a legal system which is failing us. The IND is failing us. There's a lot of problems, and I hope that we have adequate parliamentarians who are actually capable enough to also look into the legal setting and really make changes. Because
there was this one thing I read in an article by Leo Lucasse. It was about Moria, and your party actually voted against the resolution back in December to help out.
Well, it's a little bit more nuanced. We were in a cabinet with 4 parties, 2 of them, the CDA and the VVD, which are the 2 biggest. They said that they did not want it. The Christian Union did want to do it together with D66. But because you're in a cabinet, and because at the beginning we said we have a right-wing majority, so the Christian Union and D66 tried their best, but especially the CDA, because I know that a lot of people within the CDA wanted to do it, but the parliamentarians did not want to do it. So what we said is the best we could do was damage control, which was actually hold the parties with the agreements we made in 2017, because those are the agreements we made. If we would have diverted from those agreements, it will be open to vote, and with the majority in the parliament, a majority of parliamentarians does now want to bring kids from Moria to the Netherlands. So what we did is, I think there was a resolution to bring, I think 100 kids. Eventually, it became 100. To me, I don't think it was a great deal. So a lot of people know that wasn't the best deal that the Christian Union needed to be a part of. But as I explained, the alternative was to step back and make sure that there was a public vote. And we all knew that the right-wing majority was actually probably going to reduce it to 0 or another even stricter regulations.
When are the kids coming?
As I know, they're here, but they're not all kids from Moria. That's another thing too. When we decided upon that, then the minister, or Ankie Broekers, that's the one responsible for that, she said that she couldn't find enough kids that met the criteria on Moria. So some of the people also from the mainland in Greece were brought in. But 100 people are here, which is something to be positive about because they are facing a new future. But also, that deal, bringing 100 kids, even that couldn't come to fruition, and that was a VVD, not a minister, but a secretary of state. So that also leaves up a little bit disappointment for the Christian Union. But I think therefore it's very important that the upcoming elections, which are next week, to really cast a vote. Also, when it comes to migration, and vote for parties that want a change, because it's only going to happen if there's a majority of parliamentarians that want that, and the prospects
it would give the Christian Union more leeway. Also,
I think if the Christian Union becomes the biggest party in a 1.5 week, I think things are going to look better on the migration perspective.
I'll bite my tongue here. I would like to thank all of you for joining me today here. Gida Okeke through Zoom, Leo Lucassen, Mustafa, thank you so much. Eliane Schultz, also Anne van Schijk and Don Seder. This was a program by Pakhuis de Zwijger, initiated and in collaboration with the United Nations Development Program for Africa. You can rewatch and find all the information on dezwijger.nl/live. And if you would like to get in touch, send an email to julia@dezwijger.nl. You can find her email address below. Pakhuis de Zwijger broadcasts programs every working day. Please find the full agenda on the website. My name is Hasna El Maroudi. Thank you so much for watching, and good night.